The crew of the Larkspur stood frozen in disbelief as the strange creature disappeared into the thick, shadowy forest. Its glowing eyes were still vivid in their minds, and its words echoed in their heads like a distant rumble of thunder. "You are not alone in the universe. We have been here long before you." The silence that followed was almost unbearable. Elena, the captain, gripped the control panel in front of her. The ship had landed just outside the dense trees, the air thick with tension. Everyone knew something extraordinary was happening, but they weren't sure what or how to react. "What was that?" Lena's voice cracked, her hand trembling as she gripped the door of the ship. Elena turned to face her. "I don't know," she admitted. Her heart raced in her chest. The creature, or whatever it was unlike anything they had encountered before. It didn't speak in words but in thoughts, like it had reached directly into their minds, bypassing all human language. "Do you think it will come back?" Lena asked, her eyes wide with fear. Elena didn't answer immediately. She looked out at the forest. The world beyond the ship was eerily quiet, too quiet. The trees towered over them, their dark branches swaying in a wind that didn't seem to exist. The air felt charged, as if something unseen was watching them, waiting. "We need to investigate," Elena said, her voice firm with resolve. "There's no turning back now. We have to find out what this planet is hiding." The crew of the Larkspur had always been ready for the unknown, but this was something different. This wasn't just an unknown planet with strange creatures or phenomena. It was a discovery that could change everything. They were no longer on a routine mission. This was something bigger, something far more dangerous. The team suited up in their exploration gear and prepared to step out into the unknown. They gathered their weapons and equipment, though none of them were certain how useful it would be against a species that could communicate through thoughts. "Stay close," Elena said as she led the group out of the ship. Her voice was steady, but beneath it, the weight of the situation pressed down on her. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. The forest stretched out before them, its shadows long and dark. As they moved deeper into the woods, the ground beneath their boots felt soft and uneven, like it was alive. The air grew colder the further they went, the chill sinking into their bones. Each step felt heavy, like they were walking deeper into something they didn't understand. Then they saw it again. From the corner of their eyes, the creature appeared, darting between the trees like a wisp of shadow. It was the same one from before, with its glowing eyes and smooth, dark skin. It didn't seem to move in the way a creature should. It wasn't walking or running. It was gliding, almost like it was floating just above the ground. The crew froze, holding their breath. It was as if time had stopped, the only sound being their own heartbeat pounding in their ears. And then, once again, the creature spoke, not with words but with thoughts, filling their minds with its presence. "You are not ready." The words were clearer now, more distinct. It wasn't just a whisper of thought anymore. The creature's voice, though alien, sounded almost sad, as if it regretted something. Elena took a cautious step forward. "What do you want from us?" she thought, hoping the creature could hear her thoughts as clearly as it had heard theirs. There was a long pause before the creature responded, this time more slowly. "We were once one. We were whole. Now we are many. You must understand. You will see the truth." The words weren't comforting. They didn't explain anything. The creature seemed to be hinting at something deep and ancient, but the crew still had no idea what it meant. "Captain, what do we do now?" Lena asked, her voice trembling. "Do we trust it?" Elena stood still, considering the options. They didn't have many. They could try to return to the ship and leave, but the encounter had already proven one thing. This planet was far from normal. If they left now, they might never understand what they had just witnessed. They might never get a chance to learn more about this species or the power it seemed to hold. "We have to keep going," Elena said finally, her voice strong despite the uncertainty in her chest. "We need to learn more about them. This isn't just a chance encounter. There's something bigger at play here, something that could affect us all. The team exchanged nervous glances, but no one objected. They followed Elena deeper into the forest, feeling the weight of the creature's presence on their minds. As they moved through the trees, the air seemed to grow thicker, heavier. They had no idea what the creature meant by, "We were once one." But the more they ventured, the more they began to realize that this planet was hiding something much bigger than just a new species. It was hiding a secret, something buried deep within its very core. Finally, after what felt like hours of walking, they arrived at an ancient stone structure, half buried under the thick overgrowth. The walls were covered in strange symbols, glowing faintly with an eerie, otherworldly light. This was it. The crew gathered around the structure, eyes wide with disbelief. It was unlike anything they had ever seen, an alien ruin, ancient beyond comprehension. It seemed to pulse with energy, as though the building itself was alive. "This is where it all started," Elena murmured, as she stepped forward and placed her hand against the stone. The moment she did, the symbols on the wall began to shift, rearranging themselves like liquid. And in that instant, they all understood. The species they had encountered was not just any species. It was part of something much larger, a force that had been here long before humanity. And if they didn't understand it soon, they might not survive to tell the tale. A crackling sound filled the air, and the ground beneath their feet trembled. Something was awakening. And whatever it was far beyond anything they could have imagined. The crew of the Larkspur stood motionless, their hearts racing, as the strange creature melted back into the shadows of the dark forest. Its glowing eyes lingered in their minds, and the eerie words it spoke resonated in their heads. "You are not alone in the universe. We have been here long before you." The silence that followed was thick with unease. Elena, the captain, gripped the control panel of the ship, staring out at the dense trees surrounding them. There was something unsettling about the stillness of the planet. It wasn't just the atmosphere. It was as if the very air was charged with something unspoken, waiting. Her team stood in the ship's airlock, each member unsure of what to say next. "What was that?" Lena, one of the scientists, asked in a low, trembling voice, her hand shaking as she clutched the door handle. Elena didn't answer right away. She didn't have the words for it, either. The creature, was it even a creature? Was beyond anything they had prepared for. It didn't communicate through sound, but rather through thought, as though it bypassed the need for language entirely. Every word had cut through their minds like an electric jolt, stirring up something primal deep inside them. "We need to investigate," Elena said, breaking the uneasy quiet. Her voice was steady, but inside, she felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. "There's no turning back now. We have to find out what's going on here." The crew members exchanged uneasy glances. They had all signed up for this mission knowing full well that space exploration meant encountering the unknown, but this was different. This wasn't just an alien species to catalog. This felt like something far more complex and dangerous. Yet their curiosity pushed them forward. They suited up quickly, each one grabbing their gear, though no one was certain how prepared they were for what lay ahead. The equipment they carried was standard for exploration: comms, scanners, and weapons, but none of it seemed adequate against a force that could invade their very minds. Elena led the way out of the ship, the others following close behind, each of them trying to steady their nerves. The planet around them was oddly still, the dense trees stretching far into the distance. The air was heavy with an unsettling silence, broken only by the occasional creak of the trees shifting. The ground beneath their feet felt soft, almost alive, as if something was stirring beneath the surface. Each step forward felt like a step deeper into a world that didn't want them there. The crew could feel the weight of the unknown pressing down on them, a sensation that settled in their bones. Every sound seemed amplified, every movement watched by unseen eyes. As they ventured further into the forest, they started to see strange shapes moving among the trees, shadowy figures flitting just beyond their line of sight. Was it just their minds playing tricks on them, or was something truly watching them from the dark? Then, without warning, the creature appeared again. It was the same one they had seen before, tall, its skin shimmering darkly in the dim light, and its eyes glowing like twin stars in the gloom of the forest. It didn't walk in the way a creature should. It glided, floating just above the ground with an unsettling fluidity. The crew froze, unable to move, their hearts pounding in their chests. No one dared to speak. The creature stared at them, its eyes piercing into their very souls. It was as though it could see straight into their minds, knowing their thoughts before they even had them. And then it spoke again, not with words, but with the same strange, clear presence in their minds. "You are not ready." The voice wasn't harsh, but it was filled with authority. It was as if the creature knew something they didn't, something they could not even begin to comprehend. Alina felt a chill run through her. She tried to respond, to form a question, but no words came out. The creature's presence was too overwhelming. Lena, the scientist, seemed to snap out of her trance first. "Captain, what do we do now?" Her voice was barely a whisper, but it was filled with fear. "Do we trust it?" Helena stood frozen, her mind racing. She didn't know what to do. They had only just arrived on this planet, and already they were faced with a species that could communicate without speaking, that seemed to hold the power to invade their minds. This wasn't just a simple first contact. This was something far more dangerous, far more mysterious. "We have no choice but to keep going," Alina said at last, her voice steady but unsure. "We need to find out what's really happening here. There's something important about this planet, something we can't ignore." The crew nodded reluctantly, each member unsure but unwilling to turn back. They followed Alina as she led them deeper into the forest, feeling the pressure building around them. The trees grew denser, blocking out the light. The air grew colder, heavier. It felt as though the planet itself was closing in on them, and whatever was waiting in the dark was getting closer. Hours passed in what felt like moments. The deeper they went, the stranger the world around them became. The trees seemed to whisper, their branches creaking and groaning in ways that felt unnatural. The ground beneath their feet seemed to pulse with energy, as though it was alive, aware of their presence. The crew's senses were on edge. Every rustle in the underbrush made them jump. Every movement in the corner of their vision sent a wave of fear through them. They were being hunted. And then they found it. Half buried beneath the overgrown foliage, they discovered an ancient stone structure, its surface etched with glowing symbols that seemed to shift and change as they watched. The air around the ruins hummed with an energy they couldn't understand, and Alina's heart raced. This was it, the heart of the mystery. Before she could step forward, the air seemed to grow even colder, and the glowing eyes of the creature appeared once more, this time not in the distance, but right in front of them. And this time, it didn't speak. Instead, the ground beneath their feet trembled, and the walls of the ruin began to shift, revealing something even more ancient and far more dangerous than any of them could have imagined. The truth was finally within reach. But was the crew ready for it? Or had they uncovered a force they could not control? The crew of the Larkspur continued forward, the unsettling presence of the mysterious species heavy on their minds. The forest grew even denser as they moved deeper into the unknown. Each step felt more oppressive, as though the very planet was pushing back against their intrusion. The shadows seemed to stretch longer, and the air became thick with an eerie stillness, as though the world itself was holding its breath. Alina, leading the group, couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched not just by the creature, but by something far older, far more powerful. They had come to this planet seeking answers, but every moment felt like they were venturing further into a trap. The creature's cryptic words, "You are not ready," echoed in Alina's mind. Ready for what? What were they supposed to face? What kind of intelligence could project itself into their thoughts with such clarity? It felt as though they were standing on the edge of something much larger than they could ever grasp. As they moved through the dense underbrush, the crew's nerves were on edge. The only sound that broke the heavy silence was the occasional crack of a twig underfoot, a sharp reminder that they weren't alone. The trees seemed to close in on them, their gnarled branches stretching toward them like dark, skeletal fingers. And then, as if summoned by their unease, they heard it, soft at first, but unmistakable, the faint sound of movement in the distance. The crew froze, their breath catching in their throats. In the dim light of the forest, they could barely make out shapes shifting between the trees. The air felt electric with tension. "Did you hear that?" Lena whispered, her voice shaky, her eyes darting around as if expecting something to jump out at them. Elena raised a hand, signaling for silence. She wasn't sure whether they were being followed, but the creeping dread in her chest told her that something was wrong. She stepped forward cautiously, scanning the environment for any sign of the creature, or worse, whatever else might be lurking in the shadows. Then the ground trembled, just enough to be felt beneath their boots. The distant sound of something large moving, breaking through the brush, came closer and the air grew colder. Elena's instincts kicked in. This was no longer a simple investigation. Whatever this place was, it was alive, and it was beginning to react to their presence. Suddenly, out of the corner of her eye, Elena spotted a flicker of movement. There, hidden between the trees, was the creature. Its tall form stood motionless, its glowing eyes locking onto hers from the darkness. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. The creature didn't move, but it watched, an unsettling silence hanging between them. And then, as if it had been waiting for her to notice, the creature slowly approached. It glided effortlessly, its feet never quite touching the ground. The closer it got, the more Elena could sense the weight of its power, an overwhelming presence that seemed to press against her very mind. "We are the past." The voice filled her mind, deeper this time, as though it was coming from inside her own thoughts. "We are the lost ones, and now we are waking." Elena couldn't help but take a step back. The message was clearer now, though still cryptic. They are the past. The lost ones. What did that even mean? Was this species ancient, as old as the stars themselves? And if so, what had happened to them? Why were they now revealing themselves to the crew of the Larkspur? The crew stood frozen, unsure of how to respond. Every instinct told them to run, to escape before it was too late, but something within them, the part of them driven by curiosity and the thirst for knowledge, kept them rooted to the spot. They needed answers. The creature's eyes glowed brighter, and the air seemed to hum with energy. It was as though it was trying to communicate, but not with words. No, this was something deeper, something they couldn't fully understand. The longer they stood there, the more Elena could feel the pull, like invisible strings drawing her toward the creature. "What do you want from us?" Elena thought, her voice trembling but strong. She wasn't sure whether the creature could hear her, but she had to ask. They had to know what this planet held. The creature's gaze softened, and for a brief moment, Elena thought she saw a flicker of sadness in its glowing eyes. "We were not always like this," it answered in her mind, its voice soft, almost wistful. "We were once whole, one mind, one being. But the storm, the war, it scattered us." The word sent a chill down her spine. A war, a storm. What had happened to this species? Were they all broken, or was this just one fragment of something much larger? Just then, a new voice, louder and more insistent, echoed in Elena's mind, cutting through the creature's communication. This was different, urgent, commanding. "You must leave this place. You do not know what you are dealing with. The force that remains here is too strong for you." The crew exchanged panicked glances. Who had spoken? And why had the creature allowed them to hear this other voice? Before Elena could respond, the world around them seemed to shift. The trees seemed to warp, twisting and bending unnaturally. The ground trembled again, this time harder, shaking the crew to their knees. Elena could hear the distant sound of what seemed like machinery humming beneath the surface, as if the planet itself was awakening from a long slumber. The creature stepped back, its form becoming hazy, as though it was fading into the very air itself. "You have awakened us, but are you prepared for what lies ahead?" And just like that, it was gone. The crew stood in stunned silence, their minds racing to process what had just occurred. The messages, the warnings, the cryptic words. They meant something, but what? And why had the planet reacted this way? Was it just the creature, or was something more sinister stirring beneath the surface? Elena looked at her crew, all of them shaken by the encounter. "We need to keep moving. We need to find out more about this. And fast." But deep down, a nagging fear began to creep in. They were no longer just explorers. They were intruders in a place far more dangerous than any of them could have ever anticipated. And whatever they had uncovered, whatever they had awakened, would not let them leave easily. The crew of the Larkspur moved forward with an unsettling sense of dread heavy in their chests. They had barely recovered from the encounter with the mysterious creature, and now the planet seemed to be shifting around them. The air felt charged, as though every step they took disturbed something ancient and powerful buried deep within the ground. Elena, her mind racing with the cryptic messages the creature had shared, couldn't shake the feeling that they had awakened something far larger than they could handle. The forest was now unnervingly quiet. The usual sounds of wildlife were absent, replaced by a heavy silence that pressed against their ears. The trees no longer seemed like just trees. They felt alive, watching them with eyes they couldn't see. The atmosphere had changed. What was once a strange but beautiful alien world now felt ominous, as if they had stepped into the very heart of an ancient power that had been slumbering for eons. Lena was the first to break the silence. "Captain, do you think we should turn back?" she asked, her voice small, shaky. She was still gripping her weapon, though it seemed more for comfort than protection. Elena didn't look at her. Instead, she stared ahead, trying to make sense of the path before them. But there was no clear path. The dense forest seemed to shift and change, every step forward feeling like they were walking deeper into a labyrinth with no way out. "We can't go back," Elena said quietly, though her words felt hollow even to her. "We've come too far, and we need to understand what's happening here." They had to. Everything they had discovered up to this point, the creature, the cryptic messages, the strange power awakening beneath the surface, pointed to something they couldn't ignore. This was no ordinary planet. It was something ancient, something alive in a way they couldn't yet comprehend. And the creature had warned them. "You have awakened us," it had said. What did that mean? What was us? The ground trembled again, a low rumble that seemed to come from deep beneath the surface. It was more than just an aftershock. It felt intentional, like the planet itself was responding to their presence, reminding them that they weren't welcome. Elena's instincts told her to turn back, to gather her crew and leave, but she knew they couldn't. Not now. They were too close to the truth. As they continued through the thick forest, the trees began to change. Their trunks grew wider, their branches more gnarled and twisted, as if they were reaching out to stop the crew from advancing further. The air felt colder, and the ground beneath them seemed to pulse with an energy that made their skin tingle. There was a hum in the distance, like a low, distant machinery. Something deep underground was shifting, coming to life. Then they saw it, an opening in the forest, where the trees were thinned and the shadows seemed darker. It looked like a clearing, but it wasn't natural. The shapes within it were too precise, too geometric. Elena's heart skipped a beat as they stepped into the clearing. At first, it appeared to be just another rock formation, but as their lights scanned it, they realized that it was something much more. It was a structure, ancient, made of stone, but it didn't look like anything the crew had ever encountered. It was as though the stone had been carved by an intelligence that understood more than just the basics of geometry. The structure rose high above them, the stone walls covered in strange symbols that seemed to pulse with faint light. It looked like something out of a dream or a nightmare. Elena stepped forward, her pulse quickening. This is it. This is what we came for. The others followed, their footsteps slow, their eyes wide with awe and fear. The structure loomed over them, its massive stone doors partially open. But something didn't feel right. The temperature had dropped even further, and the air was thick with the scent of decay. It felt as though they had stepped into a tomb, one that had been sealed for centuries, or perhaps millennia. Elena's hand hovered near her communicator, but something stopped her from speaking. The words felt heavy, like an invisible weight pressing down on her chest. The crew stood still for a moment, unsure of what to do next. And then the ground rumbled again, stronger this time. The hum that had been present before grew louder, turning into a low mechanical growl. It was coming from beneath the stone structure. Elena's mind raced. Whatever was down there, it was waking up. Whatever force had been lying dormant for so long was stirring. The symbols on the walls began to glow brighter, and the stone doors slowly began to close. It was as if the structure was reacting to their presence, pushing them back, warning them to leave. But they couldn't. Not now. "We need to get inside," Elena said, her voice firm. There was no turning back now. "Whatever is happening here, we're going to find out." Lena hesitated. What if we're not meant to? Elena didn't answer immediately. She didn't know if they were meant to discover the secrets of this world, or if they were simply pawns in a much larger game. But she knew one thing: they had come too far. The truth was within their reach. The crew moved toward the structure, stepping cautiously inside. As they passed through the massive stone doorway, the air grew even colder. The glow of the symbols on the walls intensified, illuminating the vast space inside. What they saw before them was unlike anything they had ever imagined. The walls were lined with ancient, glowing machines, strange, organic-looking devices that seemed to hum with a life of their own. It was clear now. This was no ordinary ruin. This was a place of power, a place of knowledge. The hum was louder now, vibrating through the walls, through the very air. The structure was alive, and it was responding to their presence. Elena stepped forward, her eyes scanning the room. At the far end of the chamber, a large pedestal stood, and upon it, an object, an artifact, glowed with an otherworldly light. It was the source of the hum. The object seemed to pulse with energy, as though it was calling to them, drawing them closer. And then, as Elena moved closer to the pedestal, she heard it. Whispers, not in her mind this time, but all around her. Low, ancient voices, speaking in a language she couldn't understand. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. The object on the pedestal glowed brighter, and the hum became deafening. Suddenly, a surge of energy shot out from the object, enveloping the crew. Elena's heart raced as the power seemed to course through her, as if the very essence of the planet was reaching out, touching her, prodding her mind. And in that moment, she understood. They hadn't just stumbled upon a lost civilization. They had uncovered something far older, far more dangerous, something that had been waiting, hidden beneath the surface of this planet, for millennia. But now they had awakened it, and there was no turning back. The surge of energy faded as quickly as it had come, leaving the crew of the Larkspur standing in stunned silence. Elena's head throbbed with the weight of the strange force that had flooded her consciousness, and the air around them felt heavy, charged with an unfamiliar energy. The whispers, though faint now, still lingered at the edges of her mind, like a forgotten language pressing against her thoughts. Every fiber of her being screamed at her to run, to leave the cursed ruin before it was too late. But the crew had crossed the threshold. There was no turning back now. The pedestal, still glowing with that eerie light, seemed to pulse in rhythm with the very beat of Elena's heart. The object atop it, unlike anything they had ever seen, glimmered with a strange metallic sheen, its surface etched with patterns that seemed to move and shift before their eyes. The hum, though quieter, was still there, a deep, resonant sound that seemed to echo within the bones of the crew. "What is it?" Lena asked, her voice barely a whisper, as though speaking too loudly might disturb something ancient and powerful in the air around them. Alina's eyes were fixed on the object. She had seen technology before, alien artifacts, star maps, and energy sources from countless other planets. But this felt different. It wasn't just technology. It felt like sentience. She stepped closer to the pedestal, her breath shallow as she fought the pull to touch the glowing object. Something deep inside her told her that if she reached out, the consequences would be far greater than she could comprehend. She turned toward the others, but they were just as entranced. Each of them stood frozen, caught in the same web of fascination and fear. No one spoke, no one moved, as if the artifact itself had locked them in place. A sound broke the silence, a faint crackling, followed by the soft thrum of a mechanical voice that didn't come from any visible source. The words were incomprehensible, like a mixture of languages, alien, archaic, and somehow familiar. The whispers Alina had heard earlier grew louder again, filling her ears with an overwhelming presence. Then, a sudden flash of light, bright, blinding, flashed across the chamber, followed by an explosion of sound. The walls of the structure shook violently, the ancient stones groaning as if in pain. The pedestal trembled under the weight of an unseen force, and the ground beneath their feet quaked, as if something massive was awakening below them. Alina stumbled, instinctively grabbing Lena's arm to steady herself. "What is happening?" Lena cried, her voice filled with panic. Before Alina could respond, a terrifying realization hit her like a shockwave. It wasn't the artifact that had been awakening. It was the planet itself. The structure, the ground, the air, they were all linked, part of a vast, living system that had been dormant, waiting for something, waiting for them. The hum grew louder. The walls around them began to ripple, as if they were no longer solid but liquid. The light from the artifact grew so intense that it was impossible to look directly at it. Then, without warning, the structure seemed to open. A vast underground chamber revealed itself beneath the pedestal, deep and cavernous, stretching farther than they could see. From the depths of the chamber, an immense shadow began to rise, slowly, painfully, as if it had been trapped for eons. The shadow shifted, revealing its shape. It was vast, bigger than anything they could have imagined, and unmistakably alive. Its form was a mixture of mechanical and organic, with enormous limbs, pulsing veins, and a massive eyes that seemed to blink in unison as they focused on the crew. "No, no, no, no," Lena stammered, stepping back in horror. She gripped Alina's arm tightly, her knuckles white. This is what we woke up. This is what it meant. We shouldn't be here." The ground shuddered again, more violently this time, as the massive figure began to move, its limbs scraping against the walls of the chamber. Alina could feel the weight of its presence pressing against her, pulling her toward it as if it had some unseen gravitational force. It was alive. It was conscious. "Leave." The voice echoed in their minds again, this time not from the creature, but from the planet itself. The command was clear and heavy, the power behind it undeniable. "You have disturbed the cycle." The words were like a warning, an order. The crew had unleashed something that should have stayed buried, something ancient and powerful that had been sealed away long ago. And now they had no choice but to face the consequences. "You are not prepared to understand." The voice continued, growing more insistent. The ground trembled again, and this time, the air itself seemed to warp. The walls around them began to close in, the stone moving with a terrifying fluidity. The room felt smaller by the second. Panic rose within Alina's chest. "No, we need to get out of here," Alina shouted, grabbing the crew by the shoulders and pulling them toward the entrance. But the stone doors had already begun to seal, and the rumbling noise intensified. They were trapped. "We are the Ancient Ones." The voice rumbled, the words a deep vibration in the very bones of the crew. "And you are the catalysts of our return. You have brought us back, and now you will witness what was meant to be forgotten." The massive form of the creature that had been awakening now fully emerged from the depths, its eyes locking onto Alina with an intelligence that far surpassed anything they had ever encountered. It was massive, bigger than any machine, more terrifying than any life form they had encountered in their travels. It towered above them, its enormous limbs stretching out to make contact with the walls of the chamber, sending cracks through the structure. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Alina could feel the enormity of the creature's presence, and yet, in that same breath, she could sense something else. A darkness, a force that had been hiding in the shadows for eons, a force that would stop at nothing to regain control of the universe. And as it extended one enormous, glowing arm toward them, Alina realized the horrifying truth. They weren't just witnessing a species returning to life. They were seeing the reawakening of an ancient power, something that had been meant to remain dormant forever. The planet, the ruin, the artifact, all of it had been a trap. And now the crew of the Larkspur were its prisoners.